Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome, Boirun. Bienvenidos a todos, as we say in Ladino. My name is Ethan Marquez. For those who don't know me, I'm the managing director of La Hermandad Sephardic de America, the national umbrella organization. Okay, good evening, everyone. Of the Ladino-speaking Boirun. Bienvenidos a todos, as we say in Ladino. Sorry about that. The national umbrella organization of the Ladino-speaking Sephardic community in the United States. We're so glad to have you here this evening for our wonderful book talk on the new book, A Turkish Rosh Hashanah, a delightful Jewish children's book of Sephardic tradition and family bonds. We're here tonight with the author, Eitan Berseri, who is a wonderful community member here. I'll just say a few things about him in a moment. But just so you know, this is through our wonderful Sephardic Digital Academy, an online center of learning and education on all things Sephardic, whether it be Sephardic history, Sephardic cooking, Sephardic Ladino courses, Sephardic Torah perspectives, book talks, and so much more. If you haven't already seen our classes online, you can go to sephardicbrotherhood.com/Sephardic Digital Academy. You can also look up all our past courses, all free, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sephardic Brotherhood. I'm really excited to have a dear friend of mine, a community member, a community leader, in fact, from our hub in Seattle, from the Seattle Sephardic community, Eitan Berseri, who is an author of Persian Jewish ancestry, who married into Seattle Sephardic community nearly 20 years ago. Since then, he has been slowly picking up a few Ladino phrases and striving to perfect the perfect cup of Turkish coffee. A Turkish Rosh Hashanah is Eitan's second book. A Persian Passover, his previous book, was published by Kalaniot Books in 2022. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor right over to our wonderful guest speaker tonight, Eitan, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Ethan. Great to be with you all. And yeah, it's been a really fun project. And so first of all, thanks for hosting. When I was getting ready to do this project, I knew that we'd have so many people in the Sephardic community who would be excited to see this come to life. And so now that the book is on pre-sale and we're starting to do promotion for it, this is the opportunity to share with you all and let you know kind of what's coming and where it all came from. If you have questions or comments that you want to make during the chat here, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll definitely have time for discussion and all of that. But what I want to do is tell you a little bit about myself, and then tell you a little bit about how I became an author as my side hustle, and then a little bit about the book. I'll tell you about my first book, A Persian Passover, really just to set up the talk today, talking about the new one, A Turkish Rosh Hashanah. So a little bit about me. So my family on my dad's side originally comes from Iran. And my dad immigrated to the US in 1968. And this was before the revolution, so it was not such a traumatic time. It was actually a great opportunity seeking higher education. He and many of his brothers were already pursuing higher education at various universities in the US. My mom's family comes from Eastern Europe. Her father was, for example, from Czechoslovakia. So I'm putting these little pictures here for you. And he came in the 1930s. And so a lot of immigrant stories on my side of the family. My wife Sonia's family comes from Izmir in Turkey, which I've shown on the bottom left there. Her grandfather came from, on her dad's side, came from Russia, and everybody ended up in Seattle, which, as you know, has a very large Sephardic community. I grew up in the Bay Area, but I've made Seattle my home for many years, and I'm now contractually required by my wife to say that I'm from Seattle if anyone asks me where I'm from when we're traveling. So we have a very mixed heritage in our family, right? We've got Iran, we've got Czechoslovakia, Turkey, Russia, like so many different cultures, right? But we've kind of blended all of these into our Sephardic family today. So why start writing books, right? Like books are a very niche, sort of thing. My day job is I work as a product manager at Microsoft. I build software, right? Why would I start writing books? And to answer that question, it's actually important that I go back to my own childhood and tell you a little about some of my favorite books. So when I was growing up, I was a kid, I had an amazing selection of Jewish children's books, the best children's books, right? I had The Fools of Chelm, like the stories of Chelm where, these wacky, by the way, Chelm is a real place in Poland, but these wacky characters from Chelm get into all sorts of adventures that are, basically like taking place in a Jewish community, but the content is marginally Jewish. I also had Herschel and the Hanukkah Goblins. I actually got to meet Eric Kimmel when he came to my Jewish faith school back in the 90s, and I still have my signed copy of this book. Herschel and the Hanukkah Goblins is a book about, it's an adapted folktale from Eastern Europe that's sort of adapted around Hanukkah, and it's a great book and amazing illustrations. And another example would be The Carp in the Bathtub, which is an Eastern European family who has immigrated to New York and now lives in a high rise, and they have this carp before Passover that they develop this relationship with. And all of these books are great, but the one thing they have in common is they're all about Ashkenazi families, right? They're either Ashkenazi families in the old country or in the new country, right? But they don't really capture Sephardic or Mizrahi life. And I remember even like as a young person being like, oh, okay, well, like, yeah, I have a really good identity, a really good sense of who I am as my heritage connects to my Ashkenazi roots. But for the Persian side of my family, there really were no stories out there. And I think, yeah, so I just have a little build out here, right? All these different sorts of these different types of books that we have. So what do we have in the Sephardic community? If I back up a few years, right? We have our text, right? We have our liturgy. We're going to talk about the Seder Rosh Hashanah. We're going to talk about the rituals that happen on the eve of Pesach, of Rosh Hashanah, this Seder that has many different foods and these hopes for the new year, right? But those are words on a page, right? And they don't add a lot of color. We don't have a lot of historical context for like why we do them unless we study that separately. And let's be honest, the text on the page on its own, it doesn't really engage kids, right? Though it becomes engaging is when you add ritual to that sort of thing. Similarly, there you might have like family pictures from the old country. So this is a picture of the Levi family there. This is from the Sephardic Studies digital collection at the UW. So there's been a great effort to digitize a lot of the materials from Sephardic families that settled in Seattle. But the limitation for kids is like, this isn't engaging either because you need somebody to tell the story, right? Like just seeing the picture on its own doesn't really do much for you. And especially if it's not your own family, right? You have no context for it. There might be a few other mementos. There might be a piece of jewelry. There might be some candlesticks or something like that. But there's not a lot of context, and it's not something that kids are particularly interested in. So we still need more to engage our kids with Sephardic life. We could look at old art. So there's art from this time period. This is one from an artist named Amedeo Preziosi, who is a Maltese artist, painter who visited Turkey in the 1800s and captured a lot of vibrant parts of life there, including this picture of a rabbi with a widow, which is, beautiful, but not something maybe that kids are going to find interesting. And again, it's not narrative. There's really no story happening there. So even though it's maybe nice to look at, it doesn't really draw the attention of young people. And the other problem with these sorts of things that they're kind of stylized, right? Like every artist is kind of putting their own flair on these sort of things. So what we really need for engaging kids in Sephardic life is a narrative story. We need there to be action. Things need to be happening. There needs to be color. There needs to be lots of detail, and there needs to be meaningful Jewish content. So it's fine. I mean, the last one I would say, like, not every book has to be heavy on Jewish content, but it's nice if you can, make it educational as well. The Chelm stories, for example, are not heavily Jewish, but they take place in a Jewish community. That we in the Sephardic tradition, we have, I think Joha is one of the characters who we hear these folk tales about, and those, many of them probably don't have a lot of Jewish content. They just happen to happen within the Jewish community. The last thing you really need if you're going to be doing this is a publisher. So, and I see Lily on the call here, so I can give her a shout out here. Having a publisher is what really makes this start to have legs. So I was lucky enough with my first book to find Kalaniot Books through my wife, and I'm paraphrasing Kalaniot's mission here, but they're really focused on having publishing books that help children and their families discover the diverse mosaic of Jewish culture and history. The idea being that so many Jewish book publishers out there And there's this unique opportunity to really focus in on the untold stories from the underrepresented communities across the Jewish world. That includes Persian communities, Ethiopian communities, Ugandan communities, Indian communities. It goes on and on and on. And in this particular book that we're going to talk about today, we're talking about the Ottoman Jewish community, right? The Turkish community. And so really grateful to Kalaniot and to Lily for partnering with me on this. Again, I'm a relatively new author here, right? This is the second book that I've done. I'm not a huge author, but Lily was willing to work with me, and she has found incredible illustrators for us to be able to bring these books to life. I'll talk briefly about the first book just to kind of set up for the second book. So, you know, sometimes the best inspiration for a book comes from your own family, right? In this case, I have my kids. I had two kids at the time, Ezra and Mayan, and they were definitely the inspiration for this first book. And they always say, like, write what you know, right? So in this particular case, you know, I thought, okay, well, it would be good if there was this brother and sister dynamic. There had been a film in the 1990s called The White Balloon. If anybody has not seen it, I definitely recommend it. It's a Persian film that won some awards at Cannes, actually. And in that story, it's the eve of Nowruz. By the way, today's Nowruz, if anybody's celebrating, happy Nowruz. And in that film, the story is basically they're given a task that they need to go run some errands before the holiday starts. It's the eve of the holiday. Time is ticking, and things don't go quite the way they had planned. But by the end, things work out, right? And so I thought, okay, well, that would be an interesting blueprint for our Passover story. And my dad had already told me about some of the stories of growing up in Iran, having this communal oven for matzah that they would use. So I figured, okay, we can build something from that, and then we did. We ended up coming up with a great book on that one. It's called The Persian Passover. You can check it out. I've got the QR code here. This was a PJ Library book last year, and so that was great. And building off of that momentum, we now have the second book, right? So the second book, I felt really strongly I needed to do something that was based on the community where I live today. So I don't live in a Persian community today. Today I live in a predominantly Sephardic, Turkino and Rhodes community in Seattle, Washington. This is my synagogue, Sephardic Bikur Cholim. SBH was founded over 100 years ago, but it gets its name from a synagogue that was in Turkey. And the original community came from Tekirdağ. Tekirdağ, if you don't know, is about a 2-hour and 4-minute drive. I mapped this last night. 2-hour and 4-minute drive from Istanbul, from the Balat neighborhood, which is where there's a very large historical Jewish community in actual city of Istanbul. And many Jews from all over Turkey settled in Seattle, Washington, as you probably know. Izmir, Tekirdağ, Bursa, other cities, of course, Istanbul as well. And so one of my friends was joking the other day. He said, "Eitan, you should have put this story in Tekirdağ, not Istanbul, because that's really where our community is from." Which is true. I could have done that. I could have put it in Rhodes. That would have been appropriate too. But I was partial to Istanbul because in 2018 I actually visited Istanbul, and I had a chance to take the ferry ride and go up to the Hagia Sophia and walk around the old city a little bit and have some good Turkish coffee, and so I kind of felt like I wanted to use those memories, right, to think about how I could build a story there. I also just love the backdrop of Istanbul. I'm sure that Tekirdağ is great too, but the architecture in this city is just incredible, and it's a great setting for a story. So now I have the setting for this book, right? So I know I want to do a book about the old country in Turkey, and now the question comes like, what should the subject be? Well, I thought it would be really fun to talk about the Yehi Ratzonos. If you're not familiar with what the Yehi Ratzonos are, I've got good news. The Sephardic Brotherhood has a pamphlet for you that I'm going to plug in a second here. But what it is this seder that takes place on the first and second nights of Rosh Hashanah during dinner, where there are a series of ingredients of foods that are used that symbolize wishes for the upcoming year. And each one is like either a literal reference to words where we say like, we hope that our merits will be as numerous as the seeds of a pomegranate. That's just like a literal reference. And some of them are plays on words where we say like, we hope our enemies will be cut off, and we say the word karet because we are hoping, all these things will, we get God's protection for all of these hopes and dreams, right? And so we decided that, so I really thought this is a fun ritual. And we got back, if we go back to the beginning, what I was saying, we need to do things that engage kids. This is always something that engages kids, right? Engages kids. There's always fun food. There's always a lot of ingredients. There's a lot going on. So it's a great opportunity. And I had also learned over the years that the Yehi Ratzones Seder is actually not so widely known outside of the Sephardic community. Apparently, according to Rabbi Mark Angel, this is a tradition that goes way back to the Talmud. But across the Sephardic world, different communities would celebrate, would use different foods depending on what was regionally available, which makes sense, right? Because whatever you have near you, you'll use that. And so I thought this would be a really, really fun thing to do. What you're seeing here is one of some of the illustrations from the new book. I should mention that our illustrator Zeynep Otazalai did an incredible job. She's actually an Istanbul native. So when Lily found her, and we found out that she was a native of that city, it was like, a match made in heaven, because she can represent. She can tell me more about Istanbul than I can tell her, right? So that was pretty great. So here there's a pamphlet, and Ethan, I'm sure, can provide the link for this pamphlet in the chat here. But it's very helpful to have materials like this, because when you dig into not every Siddur will have the sources for all of the prayers that are said during this ritual. But in this particular one, there are little call outs that say, okay, this line about the pomegranate is coming from the Song of Songs. And it even gives you like the specific, citation, right? So you can see the etymology, if you will. You can see the sources for where these different prayers are coming from, which really is an interesting way of bringing it to life and kind of tying things together, right? Sephardim, as you know, read Song of Songs during the Omer, but we also reference it during Rosh Hashanah. So it's just interesting to see that all of these different rituals can be brought together in nice ways. There was other research that I wanted to do as well. Obviously, I told you I traveled to Istanbul, and that was great. Living in Seattle for 20 years is its own form of research. But there were also a bunch of books about Sephardic history that I wanted to check out. So I read some books by Mark Angel. There were books about the history of the Jews in the Ottoman Empire that I was looking at. So I wanted to see, like, how did people dress? How did people shop? Like, what were the markets like? How was life organized? Did people live in their own neighborhood, or were they mixed with others? All these sorts of details, right? That make a difference when you write a story. There's some great archival photography. I already plugged the UW Sephardic Studies digital archives. A lot of great reference photography there to get a sense of, when we were deciding what year to put this in, right? How far back do we want to go? We eventually ended up putting this in the 19th century, because that was the time where there were the most Jews living in Turkey. Towards the end of the 19th century, most Turkish Jews began to emigrate to other places because the Ottoman Empire was in decline. And also, of course, consulting with experts. So I had some great experts, Rachel Amato Bortnick, who many of you will know. She's originally from Izmir. And my friend Tyler Hadif, who works for Jimena and is a scholar in his own right, formerly of the UW, knows a lot. Great sources, and all of those things really come together when you want to have a book that's authentic. You don't want something that's authentic to a fault, where the book is not interesting or hitting you over the head with too much detail, but you want those little details to pop, right? And so if I take an example of this, like even something as simple as the architecture, like the way that this roof and the way the windows are shaped, right? The shape of the shoes that the people wore back then. All of these little details really start to matter, and that's where having a local illustrator or a native illustrator can be really beneficial. In the first book I did, the Persian Passover, our illustrator's name is Rashin Khairia. She's originally from Iran. She lives in DC now, but she added a whole bunch of details to the illustrations of that book that only a native person would really know how to incorporate. And then so the exact same thing happened in this book as well. And that was just so much fun to see it come together as the production of the book moved along. I'm just checking the chat here to see if there's any questions there. Good. Another big inspiration for, as I showed you in the first book, I had my two kids as the inspiration. It won't surprise you that I use my three kids as characters in this book too. I'm just going with what I know, right? I know my kids, it's either the right characters. Although some of the characters are more based on some of my nieces and nephews too. So I took a little bit of artistic liberty there. But the people on the right, so these are my wife's great grandparents. And Papu Leon, who's here smiling on the far left, was from Turkey, and so I wanted to base a character off somebody in the family, and this is a family picture that is a lot of the people in my wife's family have framed, and this is a picture of their stall in the Pike Place Market in Seattle, Washington. I think this is probably I'm guessing this is like 1920s-ish, something like that. And so this old archival photo, this family photo, was the inspiration for one of the characters in this book, who was also inspired by Uzieli on the far right, who was, if you've been to Shuk Machane Yehuda, I mean, he passed away, Uzieli, recently, but he's the etrog man. If you've been to the Shuk, you would know who the etrog man is. He's pretty famous. And so having this sort of character who's kind of animated, pomegranate seller, the famous, pomegranate person would be a fun character to be able to have as well. So definitely it's fun to incorporate people who are special in your life, or people who are recognizable. All right, what did I leave out of these children's books? Obviously, there's a lot that was incorporated into the book. There are a few things that I have chosen to sort of steer away from. Sometimes for simplicity, sometimes just to make the book a little bit lighter. So the big ones are like anti-Semitism, right? Both of these books take place in majority Muslim countries where anti-Semitism was a thing. It wasn't as prevalent in many times as in other parts of the world, but there were issues. And my dad told me plenty of stories about life in Iran where there were instances of anti-Semitism, and we know that happened in other countries as well. I chose to leave those out because my demographic for these picture books is age 5 to 8. And I think that, like, if you're going to talk about those sorts of things, the book has to be kind of really written for that, to address that topic head on. It can't be like a side thing. These days, after October 7th and the rise in anti-Semitism, I think this is a topic that myself and other authors will need to start to decide, is that something that we're going to take on in some way or another? Maybe we won't. It might not. There might be a way to do it in an age appropriate manner. Another topic that I left out is concept of najes or dhimmi status, which are rules that apply to religious minorities in Muslim countries. In many countries, it's not permitted for Muslims and non-Muslims to cohabitate in the same apartment building. This is the case for when my dad was growing up, at least. There are issues with touching the same food and things like that. Now, not all of those rules apply the same way in every country at every point in history, but I just sort of left those out, right? Because I didn't want to complicate the story anymore. I also don't cover things related to national or Jewish identity. So nobody in these books is talking about how proud they are to be a Turkish Jew or how proud they are to be Persian Jew, right? That wasn't like really a thing. Frankly, I think that in most of these countries, you were just Jewish. You weren't Orthodox or any denomination. You were just Jewish, and that was it. And I think today in modern life, we have a lot of questions around national versus Jewish identity, right? Are we loyal to our home country? What's our loyalty to Israel? These are all very complicated things, and I don't even know if this is a topic for my demographic right now. The 5 to 8 year old demographic. Concepts of immigration related trauma. So, the challenges with coming to a new country. So the stories I'm writing take place in the old world before anybody emigrated, right? Before people were being drafted in the Turkish army and sent to the front, before there were riots happening, before any of those things were happening, before people had the culture shock of living in the United States, which is very common. That could be an interesting topic. Rasheen Kharia, I mentioned, our illustrator, she's written a really cool book called Saffron Ice Cream, which talks about her experience as a kid growing up in New York and adjusting to life as an immigrant. I think it's a really, really important topic, but it's not something I've covered yet. And then other things like contemporary political realities, right? Like these are not things that we usually have to really share with our kids. Turkey and Iran today are pretty hostile to Jews and to Israel, and I'm just not worried about that. Like for the purposes of this book, like this is a book that celebrates the history of the Jewish people in all these countries, and I think that's okay to just just embrace that and own it. And to the extent that there are problems, political problems, like that's just what it is. Okay, so impact. So the impact of this has been really fun. Obviously, putting books out there is great on its own. It's great to have books out there that share our stories. It's great to have books that sell. It's great to have a PJ Library pick up a book when they find it, as something that they want. But really, the coolest form of impact, and of course, it's nice to see book reviews and all these sorts of things. But the coolest form of impact has been the pictures that I get. So I've gotten pictures from all friends and families and stuff like that of people reading the book, this first book, to their kids. And this is like the best, right? Because this is what it's all about. It's all about having people out there enjoying the book, and then sending me a picture of it just to say, like, people tell me, for example, they read this book, regularly with their kids, right? And I hope that this next book is just as much of a pleasure to read for all the families out there, because like that's what the whole point is, right? It's to put something out there that people really enjoy. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share. We can get into some discussion questions, but yeah, hopefully this gives you a sense of what I've been working on and why I'm doing it.
It was awesome. Thank you so much, Eitan, for kind of sharing a little bit of the background and kind of the experience you've had. Thank you so much again, also for taking the initiative, frankly, because as many of you know, like kind of Eitan referenced, there's not much out there, right? Especially for the Sephardic world and for kids to see themselves in the Jewish, let alone children's books that they're reading. So this is huge, right? It's only in the last couple of years that this conversation is coming up. I know, for example, many of you know things like PJ Library has been discussing these kinds of issues, and many other Jewish nonprofit initiatives have been talking these issues. So it's really great to have resources like Eitan making this stuff. So Eitan, thank you so much for sharing this as well. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to enter them in the chat. We'll get to as many questions as we can. And I'll just start by opening up by saying to Eitan, did you have kind of any sense at all you wanted to kind of go into children's book writing? Because like you said, you work in Microsoft. You don't really work in the book publishing.
Right. Yeah, well, we were getting PJ Library books. We were longtime subscribers for PJ Library, and I think that what happened was we just were feeling like there just wasn't enough out there, and I just kind of got fired up about it, and my wife Sonia was just like, "Hey, why don't you try to just write something?" And so I wrote a first draft, which was not very good, and I kept working. So Sonia and her coworkers at the Seattle Hebrew Academy were actually the early readers for this. I was basically, they're all kindergarten teachers. So I was like, all right, well, what do you think? Would this be good for, 5-year-olds, like, we're in kindergarten? And so they helped me work on it. And I'll tell you, Ethan, most publishers, I only sent this to Jewish publishers. Most publishers didn't return my calls, right? They were not too keen on an unvetted or an unproven author, right? But Lily, to her credit, really took me on, and she was like, "It's all right, it's your first time, but this is an interesting story, and we have what to work with." And she helped me get it to a place where it was, ready, good, where it was, a solid story.
Now you mentioned how you're of Persian heritage via Seattle, and infused with Turkish identity vis-a-vis your wife and the community. How do you, in terms of your personal identity, how would you say you balance these? Because you're integrating so many different elements in your own household. And then you're also American, right? At the end of the day, we're all Americans. Yeah. Those of us, most of us at least watching this, we're American citizens. So we're also American Jews. So how do you kind of integrate all these traditions in your household?
Oh my gosh, it's a good question. I don't think there's it's sort of all of the above except for Passover, where I'm definitely Persian, and I because we eat the rice.
For the record, by the way, just for a reminder, everybody, Turkish Jews don't always all eat rice on Passover. In fact, many do not. It's actually really based on the city you're from. So the fact that Eitan in his house eats rice is very different from what an average Turkish Jew
Yeah,
probably do. But
right.
anyway, please
Yeah,
continue.
yeah. But honestly, like it's I don't know. I mean, I don't want to like get too like philosophical, but like I think that like today in today's both in Israel and the United States, I don't know about elsewhere, but definitely in Israel and the United States, there are so many families with combined heritage from many different places that you're kind of just creating a fusion of all these different things. We go, like I said, we go to Sephardic we go to a Sephardic synagogue. The tunes are incredible. I don't think that there's a Persian synagogue I've ever walked into that had tunes like SBH. So for that, like we're going with SBH, right? For the food, I prefer Persian food, right? I like my Persian food. So I think it's all about like, kind of figuring out for yourself and figuring out, what works and what doesn't work. Yeah.
Now, maybe you could talk a little bit about once you pitched the story, once you got it picked up by the publisher, what's the process for actually procuring an illustrator? Because people talk about obviously for adult oriented books, or illustration is not really an issue, right? We're not talking about that, but for a child's book, it's critical, right? 95% really of the narrative story
Yes.
is done through the visuals. So how
Yes.
do you kind of go about that process to find
Oh
someone?
my gosh. I should have had Lily co-present. She's on the call, but I should have had her co-present with me so she could tell me. I'm not going to do justice to how I'm sure it's so much. I mean, I can't even think I can represent how much work she puts into considering all the different, artists. I mean, I should also mention, if anybody's wondering, we always look for Jewish illustrators who will already have context on Jewish rituals, Hebrew, all these sorts of things, right? So we look for Sephardic illustrators in the US. We look for Sephardic illustrators in Israel. We look for non-Sephardic illustrators in Israel. Like we, like all for both the books actually, um, far and wide, right? And some of them maybe didn't have quite the right artistic style. Some of them were too expensive. Some of them weren't available, right? And it's like comes down to like it narrows it down to like a handful of candidates. And then, I think at one point Lily found like I don't know, like three that we thought would be like in budget, available, and like would be a good fit. And then I think it just came down to picking one. Lily, I don't know if you want to add anything to it, but yeah, like just incredible with Zeynep. Like I have seen Zeynep's work. I think this is her best book. Like I went on her Behance. Behance is this website you can go. People post their portfolios. Zeynep has done a lot of work. I think this is her best book. And I'm not. I know I'm biased, but I think like, the level of detail that you see in this book is uncanny. It's really really good. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. And tell me also a little bit on the writing side. You mentioned how you went to your wife, frankly, and kind of the people at SHA, the Seattle Hebrew Academy, who were actual educators to kind of work through some of the kinks here, which was really wonderful, and that you had that resource. So moving on from that, what is the actual like step by step? Like how long in timeline did it actually take to get like the idea into reality? I mean, people I don't think understand like the process of publishing a book is not an easy one, and I know you talked about it a little bit. But what's the timeline here? Like how long does it actually take?
Well, I think it really matters. Is this your side hustle or is this your main gig, right? Because I'm working on this like at night on nights and weekends. But I think that really the getting a first draft isn't the most time consuming part. I think the editing process, could take time, right? Getting it through rounds of edits and refining because usually the final word count is something like 1,100 words, around somewhere between 1,000 to 1,200 words, something like that. But when I write a first draft, it's like usually like closer to 2,000 words, and then I have to start trimming and trimming because the way I think a lot of writers work is like you have to get everything down on the page, and then you start to sort of refine and distill, right? And so if you can, so what I do is I start with like little flashcards, like little index cards, and I put down a bunch of ideas. So I'll use these things, and I'll write down just a bunch of ideas. Okay, like this could be literally just like little bits of words, and then I'll pitch them to Sonia, my wife, and I'll just say like, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? What do you think of... And for this book, I actually had a friend, Paul, who's a screenwriter, and we were hanging out on Sukkot, like two Sukkots ago, and he was like, he was like, oh, well, why don't you take those three ideas and combine them into one story? And so, because originally I had one, like each of these three characters that you see here, they're all cousins. Each one of them had like a plot, right? One thing they were trying to like deal with. One of them was like dealing with a bully, and one of them was dealing with like a fear of cats, and like he was like, why don't you have them like all kind of converge, right? And so that was a good idea. And so once I have that, then I start with a first draft, and then that goes through, you know, rounds and rounds and rounds of edits and clarifications and all that. And then getting the illustration done, that can be a process too, because the illustrator in these cases will do a character study. So she'll basically create like a sketch of like the main characters who are going to be, you know, depicted many times. And once that's locked in, then we'll get like a sketch of the different pages. So it's a 35-page book. Lily and I will have already laid out the text across 35 pages. And so the illustrator knows, all right, on this page, this is going to be the part of the story. I'm going to lay out this picture, right, to go with these words. So we'll see like a sketch, a black and white sketch of what those will look like. And once we've nailed that down, then she'll start to bring in detail and color, and then you start to see the finished product start to come together. So yeah, it happens like in stages. But again, like it's been, I think like a year and a half, I think we've been working on this book, and it ships in August. So yeah, it's a process. It's a process. I should also mention like this Lily and Kalyana, they've got other books going. Like that's not one of the reasons I think that it takes longer. Part of it is, you know, this creative process, but part of it is, you know, printing takes a while. We print offshore, right? And there's other books coming out, so they've got other books that are in process.
What would you say is kind of your favorite detail that kind of manifested itself in this book? Because you talked about like the beauty of kind of the visual details. I mean, but between the visual and also the writing details, obviously the nuances are really critical, right? Because that's basically showing the story of how unique this community is. But which is
Yeah,
your favorite one?
right here, the Turkish coffee. Let's see if can I zoom in? Here we go. There we go. That's my favorite detail. I was like, the finjan with the Turkish coffee, because I asked Zainab, I was like, can you please like if you work in some Turkish coffee? Because like I'm such a Turkish coffee nut. So she worked that in for me. So yeah, that's my favorite one.
That is awesome. Have you learned how to make Turkish coffee yourself properly?
Yes, yeah, and it was funny when I was in Istanbul. This was like 6 years ago. I was in Istanbul for a work trip, and I was at a hotel, and I asked for Turkish in the morning for breakfast. I came down, I said, "May I have Turkish coffee?" And he looked at me a little bit funny, and he's like, "You know, it's very strong, right?" And I was like, "Yes." I was like, "Yes, I know.
Oh, you think
I'm
so? You're
here for it.
American.
I'm
Just
here
realize
for
you're
the
a
strong
Persian
stuff.
with Turkish
I want
influence
the
and also
strong stuff. Give me
Sephardic
the
and all
strong
that stuff
stuff."
there. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, and it was very
Take
good.
it and take it. Oh, that's amazing. Now, tell me
Yeah.
also, how does this compare to your first book? Because you talked about, right, your first book obviously was focusing on the Persian narrative, but still a
Mhm.
children's book. So how does this, both in terms of process, but also content, compare to the first
Mhm.
one?
Well, it's funny actually because both of them take place with like the lead up to a holiday, like shopping in the market, which is like I was like, oh man, like am I like repeating myself here? But they are different stories. There are different, right? They're different holidays, the different characters, right? Um, I think maybe one of the things I'm learning about myself is I just really like going to the market, apparently. Like I just enjoy like going to the Shuk. My favorite place to visit in Israel is the Shuk, both in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. So uh, maybe that just says more about me than than any of these things. But I think it's fun. I guess there's like a lot happening there, right? There's like a lot of material to like. There's like different characters, right? And there's like misadventures that can happen when you're out in public like that. So I guess that's probably why, you know. But it was definitely. I think. I mean, you know, similar in the way that the main characters in both of these stories are kids. Do you remember in Peanuts? Do you remember in Charlie Brown? Like the adults would always be off screen, and you'd always hear like want want want. Like they don't really talk very much. I don't know if you remember. I might be dating myself, but the older people know what I'm talking about. And so I thought it would be interesting if you kind of made the adults in these stories like really marginal characters, and then all of the like agency, all of the important parts of the story happen with the kids doing stuff, working together, right, helping each other out. That would be interesting, and especially if they're doing things related to preparing for the holiday. Then when someone reads this to their kids or to their grandkids, whoever, when kids hear this story sitting in their home, they're gonna be like, oh, okay, like I get it. Kids have a role in the preparation of the holiday. It's not just I mean, for those who have kids, right? Like, how many times has it been like the eve of a holiday and the kids are like playing or doing something, and you're like, come on, like, I need you to set the table. I need you to go to pull this in, take out the trash, like, blah, 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 right? And so, like, part of the, like, the subconsciously what I'm doing here is I'm telling my kids, like, you have a job, you're just as much part of this holiday prep as we are. Look at the sort of, responsibilities and role you can take on to make these nice rituals, come to life, to make a nice holiday for everybody.
That's a beautiful concept, by the way, and also it's kind of teaching that responsibility, right? That you're going to
Yeah.
be part of this process as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I don't know if you've seen, but many of you have seen that the fact that you're seeing kind of almost this explosion or renaissance of Sephardic books, right? Like you have this past year, Kantika, a new Sephardic novel just published. You have a new novel called the Sephardic Turkish Patriot. Will be featuring next month. I mean, you have several books, historical and novelistic and fictional, that are coming out about the Ladino-speaking Sephardic narrative. And this is one additional, obviously, albeit very unique because it's Sephardic. It's a children's book. Are you noticing a pattern in this Jewish children's world, in this book world that we
I think
cite?
so. Yeah, I think so. I think there's more and more interest. I think people are realizing that there's just so much. There's just a there's like, what was the word? I'm going to go back to I think mosaic is the word that they use at Colonia, right? There are more tiles in this mosaic of the Jewish world. I don't really know why. I think that there's Eastern European Judaism, like Ashkenazi Judaism, is such a big literary tradition, right? Yiddish theater goes all the way back to the old country, right? And all these things. There's such a longer literary tradition. To my knowledge, Persian and Middle Eastern and Southern European Jews do not have the same literary tradition. They might have a literary tradition, but I don't know if it's as long standing. So I think that it's kind of a discovery now that, oh, there are a lot of more stories to share. The good news is that there's a specific initiative underway called the Sephardic Stories Initiative, which is being led by the Grinspan Foundation that sponsors the PJ Library program, in partnership with the Sam Foundation, the Sam Israel Foundation, based out of Seattle, that many of you will be familiar with. So this is a jointly funded project that's designed to incubate and develop more children's stories in the Sephardic and Mizrahi world. There are 7 authors participating in the first cohort. I happen to be one of them. And the idea is to get more stories out there. More picture books, more young adult books like novels, more graphic novels. So you'll see picture books, graphic novels, and regular novel and chapter books coming out that focus on characters and families and stories that are situated in the Sephardic and Mizrahi community. So a lot more is coming. And in subsequent years, the current cohort will become mentors to new authors with similar heritage. So we're going to see more and more and more stories coming out, more ways to inspire kids and share the beautiful history here. So I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome. I do have to make one correction that there is actually a robust literary tradition in the Mizrahi and the Sephardic Southern European world. Part of the problem is, as you're kind of alluding to, people just don't know it, right? That the same depth of research that has been done in the Ashkenazi Yiddish-speaking world, because we know a lot about Yiddish theater and all these different things, just hasn't been done in the Sephardic world, despite the fact that, Salonika, Istanbul, there are many literary plays in Ladino, in fact, that date this vast history of fascinating stories. But that's a story for the time, I'm sure.
Yeah, you're making my point for me. Yeah, see, I don't even myself, I'm not up on all of it. So yeah.
What would you say? What's your hope? What are you hoping that the kid who's at home with his parent, 5, 6 years old, reading this story over and over again, what's your hope that he learns or she learns?
Yeah, I think for this particular book, I think it's learning about the Yehiratzonis and this fun tradition, and I hope that people will try it out. Like if it's not a tradition that your family does, even if you're not of Sephardic heritage, like it's a great tradition. It's a great way it's an interactive experience for the kids, keeps them engaged, and I think it's great. It's a lot of fun. So that's really it. Maybe it'll make them more curious about their own heritage, make them want to learn more. But at the very least, yeah.
And kind of the most important question now: where can people buy this book for themselves, for their kids, or even their inshallah, grandkids? Papyrus
Yeah,
and
so I included a QR code here. They can scan. I guess I can drop a link in the chat as well. But you can scan this QR code and you can order it on Amazon. It's available for pre-order. I'll drop a link in the chat as well.
Yeah, it'd be great. So again, for everybody watching, it's available on Amazon, other places where books are sold. You can scan the QR code with your phone. And again, it's a wonderful book by a community member, no less, who is actively leading the charge to get more young people involved in learning their Sephardic customs and traditions. And awesome. So I think that's it for this evening. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I really want to thank Eitan for taking the time out and for having this kind of first, public book talk on Zoom with our Digital Academy, which we're really grateful to have. And inshallah, we say in both in Persian and in Ladino. We also say Sakir al Dio in Ladino. That this will be one of many more wonderful books that Eitan will publish for the Sephardic community and for all Jews to learn about our Sephardic custom. So Eitan, really thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Ethan. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much as well. And again, if you missed any part of this recording, you can check it out on YouTube at youtube.com/Sephardic Brotherhood. Thank you all so much, and wishing everybody a Noche Buena. Have a great night. And a Purim Alegre, or an early Purim Alegre for everyone.
Purim Alegre. Bye-bye.